culture is built from the inside out. And if you want performance, focus on the inside, take remarkable care of your employees, and they will take remarkable care of your customers.
Welcome to Authentic Energy, a podcast dedicated to getting to the bottom of what it means to be your true, authentic self at work. I am your host, Wendy Brand, a former corporate executive turned transformation coach. Let's take this learning journey together as I meet with guests weekly to learn how they've managed, or not managed, to find the elusive boundaries and success in their career and what it really means to find balance. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we continue the culture conversation with Pam Nemec. Pam was on the podcast as one of my first guests talking about culture. So when I decided I wanted to create an entire series dedicated to the topic, I knew I needed to have her back on the show. This episode is geared around communications and the critical role it plays in relation to culture. So what I did not share about Pam last time is that she was my leader for 2 years in the previous organization where we both worked. She had been leading corporate communications and then was given HR under her purview, and that's when we began to work together. She transitioned to my leader right after the sale of the company. She was my leader when COVID hit, and she was my leader during the organization's first reduction in force. I have seen her lead. She is also a cheerleader and protector of her people, an expert communicator, and a builder of culture. So I am so excited to share this conversation with you because I know that there are nuggets for leaders that might be listening. Since leaving our previous organization, she now speaks, consults, and facilitates all things culture. She has created a framework that she shares here, and I think you're really going to love it. So here we go. Hi, Pam. Thanks so much for joining. Welcome back to the Authentic Energy Podcast, round 2 for you.
Yes, thank you for having me back. I can't wait to talk about things that are near and dear to my heart, culture and communication.
Yes, thank you. And you are the person that I immediately thought of when I was preparing the culture series, and I knew that communications was going to be just a critical component of that. I know that you have a lot of experience in internal and external communications and building cultures. So help us make that connection between culture and communications and why communications is so important.
All right. Thanks, Wendy. So for over 20 years, I was in charge of communications for a multi-billion-dollar brand. And I often tell people this story that when I started, it was a much smaller organization. And I've worked for smaller organizations. And so I relied heavily on just, catching somebody in the hallway or picking up the phone and giving them a call. And I realized real quickly as I was in these bigger organizations that relying on that it was not going to work long term. And so you have to build systems in order to make sure that you're staying connected with your team, with your organization. And if you don't, you'll find out really quickly as you grow, it becomes increasingly difficult to keep folks on the same page and ensure performance is headed down the right path. So I, over time, made it my mission to build out leadership and communication systems within organizations so that we can stay connected, make sure the teams know not just what the performance measures are and the goals are, but also that they feel cared for and they feel respected and valued in the organization.
Awesome. And do you have a definition of culture that you like? How do you define culture?
So I define culture as the shared values of an organization, but also the attitudes, the actions, the standards of that organization, and how people work together in a way that drives performance.
Yeah, I like that definition. And so then what do you think the role of corporate communications is, and how does that play into culture?
Yeah, I think for corporate communications, it's such a critical role. And unfortunately, a lot of companies don't have a designated communications department. or even a person. Sometimes that role is handed off to somebody in HR, or maybe it's handed off to an administrative assistant, those types of things. And what happens when you do that is you start to lose focus on the critical importance of communication in your organization. And I think that communication is a host of things that go together to build culture. And it's about informing people. It's about making sure people understand the performance expectations, the goals that are in the organization. And that's a component that a lot of leaders are very good about focusing on. But where we start to fall short as leaders is we forget that we can't just talk about performance and goals all the time. We also have to be very intentional about how are we caring and connecting to the people that are on our teams. And so I would say that if you were looking at it as 3 boxes, number one, you have your performance and goal setting. In that box, you should be having daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual meetings to do that. But then you've got this other box that a lot of times you don't see in business models. This other box is all about care and connection. What are you doing daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually to care and connect to your team? Now, this might show up as daily, might just be touch points. Are you walking by and talking to them? Are you picking up the phone? Are you having a quick Zoom call? What are you doing to touch base? This is where you might have your team building events, whether that's a lunch, whether that is a quick happy hour. Maybe you leave a little early and gather everybody up. It might be where you're doing some training. This is the space for that. And then this last box is really where you focus on respect and appreciation. And I say respect because that's where I think communication really fits in. People feel respected when they feel informed, when they feel heard, when they feel like you've collaborated with them. And so this is where I think you've got the same cadence, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. But in that cadence, you are really making sure that you're telling the brand story. You're holding up and spotlighting the people that are doing it right and representing the culture the way you want it represented, whether that's through beautiful storytelling on a video or whether that is in a newsletter. But this is where you're really bringing your brand to life. And so if people could focus on those 3 boxes and really put that structure into their organizations and get their leaders to understand that leaders who are connected do those 3 boxes, and leaders that aren't as connected tend to focus on just one. And what I've seen in my experience, I've found that if you can really focus on those 3 boxes and make sure people feel connected to you as a leader and connected to your organization, what happens is they number one start leading that way. Number 2, they start performing beyond your expectations. And so they start doing really amazing work that connects people to the customer, to the client. And that's when you start getting the real magic starts to happen. And you go from a culture that was inside your 4 walls to a brand that is shared with customers in a way that's so cool. And but when it happens and when you get to see it and you have a front row seat, you understand that culture is built from the inside out. And if you want performance, focus on the inside, take remarkable care of your employees, and they will take remarkable care of your customers. I would say focus on those 3 boxes. Make sure that you're setting those goals. You're talking about performance on a regular basis. You are caring and connecting on a regular basis. And you are showing respect and appreciation for your team on a regular basis. And if you can do those things, then you'll start to see how that cascades out to your clients and your customers, and that performance starts to take care of itself. And that's when you can sit back and go, all right, I did something pretty good here.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you said from the inside out, because I think sometimes leaders may feel like the customer's the one that's, paying the bills, right? But really, the employees are the ones that make sure that the customers stay. And so I think starting from the inside out, and then if culture truly is the company's kind of core values and behaviors that tie back to those, I see the value in having a strong communication strategy, because otherwise, how do you get across to the employees what's important to you and what's important to the organization, other than how you're communicating, connecting, monitoring performance, all of that? So whether somebody has a big comms team or a small comms team, what is a good strategy? What would you say? What type of communication strategy would you put in place to really help share what are those values and behaviors that you're expecting to see?
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk about in the bigger model that I teach is there's the very first step is create the vision for your culture, right? You have to understand before you can even begin to communicate anything, you have to know what kind of culture do we want to create here. And so a lot of companies have their core values, and that's amazing. And that's your starting point. Take a look at what your core values are. Make sure you understand the purpose of your organization. Make sure that you know the guiding principles of your organization. And when I talk about guiding principles, I'm talking about behaviors. I'm talking about what do you want your leaders to do and say, and how do you want them to behave? Because if those leaders are not walking that talk, then it won't permeate in your organization. So the first thing is to really ensure you know what kind of organization do you want to be. Then you start to say, okay, if that's it, let's really talk about what is our brand story? What is the story of our brand, and are we telling it? What are the brand standards? Sometimes people don't know that what your expectations are. And I know as a leader, there's times where, I would get frustrated. I'm like, oh my gosh, why can't they just do it this way? Well, it's because I didn't tell them that that was my standard. I didn't explain that that was the standard I was after. And so when you're not clear with people, it makes it difficult on your employees. And I know it's very easy to blame the employee, but the truth is it's always us. We got to get clearer on what it is we want. And so I think once you know your values, you know your purpose, you know your guiding principles, now you can start telling your brand story. You can start creating those brand standards, and you can really bring those behaviors that you want to see to life, and you can start reinforcing them within your communication strategy. So first, that's the very first step, is you got to get clear on that.
Right.
Then if you wanted to say, okay, now I'm clear on what I wanted. I'm clear on what I want to be, but how do I make that actually so in our organization? Well, that's when you start to say, okay, what's my message? This is another model that I teach. What is our message? What is the method that we're going to use to deliver that message? And who's going to be the messenger? And those 3 M's are important because it starts to make you think about, number one, the message itself is important. You've got to decide, how do I want to tell this story? What do I need to convey to this audience? And how do I want them to feel when they walk away? And you got to get clear on that, because it affects how you write. And then the second thing is this method idea. So the method is not just the delivery, like what tool are you going to use? What platform are you going to use to actually share this information? Is it going to be face-to-face because it's a sensitive topic and it's a one-on-one that you really need to do just as for respect for that person? Great. Or is it a big meeting and it's going to be delivered through video? Is it going to be live? Is it going to be in an email? thinking through if this is the message, what's the best method for delivery, always with respect in mind. How is it going to make that audience feel most respected? And then the other part of that is cadence. You've got to create a cadence that your team can count on. Mm-hmm. The people have to know that, okay, I'm going to get that information weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. They need to know, what is the cadence to this? So getting clear on that as an organization. And then last is the messenger. And this is an important one because, again, it's back to respect. If you were doing a reorg in your organization and it is going to affect your team, I would recommend that the person that is closest to that information and closest to that person is the one that's going to deliver that. They don't want to hear about that in front of an entire company or an entire room of people, especially if it might not positively impact them. So thinking through the best messenger, and sometimes this isn't the easy way, right? Sometimes you don't want to do what I'm talking about because it's not easy. Mm-hmm. The easy way is to just broadcast everything out to everybody and then let the emotions flow. That is not the right way. The right way is to take the time to think through the cascade of a message and really understand the emotion that might come from that and find the most respectful way to deliver it. And that's how you connect with your team. They may still not like what's happening, but they will at least feel respected and valued by their leader who took the time to tell them in a way that is respectful. So
yes.
That was a lot.
No, it's great. And it, I know firsthand, because you actually came to me and told me when I was going to be moving teams, and it makes such a huge difference to come from your leader rather than a town hall meeting with everybody in it, or a communication that gets emailed out, or and I think it's the same. I have some change management experience, and one thing that we learn is that employees if a change is going to happen, they want to hear it from the person, their direct leader. Yes, they want to hear the why from the CEO, but they want that direct contact from their personal leader because it feels more personal, right?
Absolutely.
So I think same thing.
It gives you a minute, Wendy, to say, okay, I just need to absorb what you just said.
Yeah.
I need to think about how that impacts me. I need to be able to ask Pam the questions. I need Pam to help me think through it. Instead of, hey, Wendy, come to this team meeting with 50 people in it, and I'm going to announce this to the whole group. And then you are processing in that moment.
Right.
And I will say this, in defense of some of the leaders out there that may have done this before, and may have made a misstep like this. It happens, and it's not. Sometimes it isn't even intentional. It is purely speed, in which something is happening, and so that message doesn't get delivered in a way that is really the way they should have.
Yeah,
I would say this, and if that's ever happened out there to a leader, is it happens, but instead of getting defensive and saying, well, they just need to deal with it, it's fine, they're going to be fine, and this is just the way it is, it's business, this is business, it's not personal, that sort of thing, that's not going to help matters. What leaders ought to do if that happens, just to be honest with that person, go back to them privately and apologize for the way that happened, and then give them the opportunity to actually have a conversation with them. Because sometimes it does happen. I've seen it. And sometimes it really wasn't intentional. It was something we overlooked. And so when that occurs, that's when you've really got to take a minute, pump the brakes, and go talk to those people and make sure that you feel heard and respected.
Yeah. Okay. What about generational differences? Have you seen anything different with the way that the newer generations are wanting to be communicated to? Yeah,
I have done a little bit of research on that. And what I'm seeing, and Wendy, I'll tell you another quick story, but when I was in my 20-year career, I sat between the millennial Gen Z generation, and I was had the baby boomers that I reported to, and I was a Gen Xer. So I had every generation, generational perspective within the different situations that would come up. And I found that the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation is not that far off from the baby boomer generation. I think the situation is they are a little more open to change than some of my baby boomer folks were.
Yeah.
And so I found myself often bridging the gap, trying to understand everyone's perspective and finding that middle ground that worked for all generations. And I just still to this day, I believe is so important. I mean, we have so much discourse in our country, in our companies, in our communities right now. And I wish that people would really sit at the table together, give all generations an opportunity to share their thoughts and their perspectives, really listen to what everyone has to say, because I promise you there is a middle ground, and we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
I think that the younger generations have a lot to teach us, but I also think us old folks, Gen X and baby boomers, have a lot to teach them. And I think if we could just respect each other, we could get a lot further in our companies and communities in our world. And I just think we are so determined to be right. We're determined to be right. And I think that's a problem. I don't think that's going to get us where we need to go. And right now, let's just take, for example, this return to work situation where folks are asking people to return to work. And they're getting some pushback. And I understand, again, because I've been in this role of middleman, I understand what the baby boomer Gen Xers are thinking, because we grew up in an era where we went to work every day. We commuted, we got dressed, we put our makeup on, we wore those uncomfortable high heel shoes, and we went to work, right? And so we can't understand that why everybody else wants to do what we did, right?
Right.
However, the younger generation has grown up with basically an iPad or a phone in their hand.
Yeah.
And they just don't understand, what is the point? Why do I have to be in an office? So they don't understand, because they've been connecting in a different way their whole lives.
Right.
And so there's a gap.
Yeah.
And what I think we need to do is, if I was the CEO of a large company right now, I would be gathering my younger generations along with my Gen Xers and my baby boomers, and I would be putting them all in a room, and I would say, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what we can do to maintain an amazing culture, because people are afraid that culture is going to erode because everyone is so remote and disconnected. Let's talk about that. What would work for you? What would work for us? What do we need to do as a company? We've got to be making sure we've got performance and goal setting, right? We've got to make sure there's care and connection, and we got to make sure we're communicating and making people feel respected and appreciated. Those are the three buckets. Now, how are we going to go tackle that? Team, right? It's so much easier to just do a mandate, send it out, and say, deal with it. But it's such a much better long-term solution is to actually get everyone in a room and talk it out. Because I promise you, if you do that you're going to have a much better solution. And then that goes back to, now you've made those folks, all of them, not just the millennials and the Gen Zers, but all of your generations within your organization feel heard, valued, respected. And now, guess what? They came up with the way they're going to work in the future. So
buy-in
They
right
can't,
there.
they can't
You've created buy-in.
complain.
Yeah.
Right. You've created the buy-in. And so to me, it's like, why not? You
Yeah.
don't have to do everything they ask or suggest, right? It's just, but you can listen.
Yeah.
Maybe that brainstorming session leads to something really fantastic that becomes a huge point of difference for your organization. But if you don't even ask, how will you ever know?
Right. And it doesn't matter what generation you are, we all want the same thing. We want that respect and that sense of belonging and to be considered. And so I love how you've said that. And I agree. I think we may want slightly different things across the generations, but at the end of the day, we just want to feel heard and like we had a say in the matter, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you
Awesome.
know, if you, at the end of the day too, one of the things that I'm seeing in all this research is that people are feeling very disconnected. Now they were feeling disconnected before the pandemic.
Right.
Okay. This disconnection was just amplified because the pandemic just put such a spotlight on it. And obviously remote work did as well. But that disconnection that people are feeling is leading to a host of other problems and issues in our world. And so I think that if people can understand that at the core of this, their teams, the people on their teams just want to feel like they matter. They want to feel like you care, and they want to feel connected to the organization, and that they have a really important role in the performance of that company.
Yeah.
And if you can make them feel that way by not just saying it, but actually intentionally structuring it into your day-to-day behaviors and actions and attitudes and values, then you're going to see the transformation in your company. You just can't go wrong. I mean, if you just work the plan, it will lead to great performance.
Yes. And I was going to ask about, a more equitable and diverse culture. I think some of what we just talked about addresses that, right? Generational or other differences. But anything that you would say in addition to that around building a diverse culture and how communications plays into that?
I think you're right. I think what I'm saying is diversity to me is diversity of voice, diversity of opinion, diversity of perspective. And the only way to get that is to ask, is to talk, is to bring people to the table. I don't believe that we should just do things because there's pressure from the outside to do them. I think that's a mistake. If you want it to feel authentic, then I think you have to make sure you're actually talking to the people on your team and really understanding what it is they need from you.
Mm-hmm.
What do they need from your company and your organization to feel respected and valued? And then build from there.
Great. I love that advice. And so what advice would you give leaders that might be listening about anything they can do to create an environment that allows others to bring their authentic energy or their true self to the workplace?
Well, I think the first thing they can do is bring their true, authentic selves to the workplace. I think that leaders need to be who they are and be vulnerable with their own team. I think that that's how you stay. That's how you bring out the authenticity of your team. That's how you make people feel comfortable talking to you about a situation that in other companies you might get in trouble for talking about, right?
Yeah.
I always wanted my team to feel comfortable coming to me with whatever was on their mind, and knowing that I was going to listen and help work through it with them, not say, well, you should have all the answers and I don't know why you're bothering me with this, right? You immediately shut down communication when you do that, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's just about being authentic yourself, talking about the mistakes you make, talking about how insecure you feel about a certain situation, talk about how that leader or that person in the organization was out of line in that particular meeting. I mean, acting like you don't see the problems in the organization, to me, is a disconnect with your team.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to have those real conversations with folks to say, I know, I saw that too, and here's what we're going to work on. Here's what we're going to do about it. Versus, I don't know what you're talking about. I thought everything was fine.
Yeah.
Go back to your office and do your job. I mean, that's never going to work, right?
Right.
So the main thing, and that's a long-winded way of saying this, but my main thing is you need to be just as authentic if you want to bring out authenticity in your team. Be honest, be transparent, be real, and allow folks to be themselves with you and feel safe enough to do that. And I think that's how you bring out authenticity.
Awesome. So well said. And I think that is our time. But Pam, thank you so much for allowing me to bring you back on, really speak about the communication side of culture and your experience building out great communication strategies for organizations for decades. So really appreciate you coming on.
It was fun. Thanks for having me, and let's do it again soon.
Yes. All right.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
Wendy.
What a great conversation. Okay, here are my takeaways. Number 1, communications is critical to culture. It includes a host of things: informing people, making sure they understand goals of the organization, performance expectations, and it's about caring and connecting to those on your team. Number 2, the 3 boxes of communications that impact culture are performance and goal setting, care and connection, and respect and appreciation. Number 3, leaders that aren't as connected tend to just focus on one box. Number 4, if you lead through all 3 of these boxes, employees feel connected and informed and start leading their own team that way, and they start performing beyond your expectations. Number 5, culture is built from the inside out. Take remarkable care of your employees, and they will take remarkable care of your customers. Number 6, get clear on who you want to be. Establish your core values, understand your purpose, set your vision, and create your guiding principles. Then you can start telling your story, setting brand standards to create your brand strategy. Number 7, if you're asking, how do I communicate who we want to be? There are 3 words that start with the letter M that you can use. What is our message? What is the method used to deliver the message? And who is going to be the messenger? Number 8, communications methods across different generations in an organization is really about listening and working to understand what they want or need. We are all humans, and we all want the same thing. We want respect, our opinion to be considered, and to feel heard. Number 9, the same applies to allowing other diversity of thought and voice from different cultures, genders, backgrounds, perspective. The only way to get to that is to ask and to bring people to the table. Number 10, leaders can create an environment for employees to bring their true, authentic self to work by bringing their true, authentic self to work. That wraps up our episode on communication and culture. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned next week for another culture episode.